Hi, folks who are joining in. We'll give it a minute or two just as people come in, but thanks for joining. Guess I can share my screen in the meantime. Great. So for folks who are coming in, actually, maybe before I do this, I will add to the chat. We have a quick little optional survey. It's 3 multiple choice questions. If you would like to take it to gauge the room on where we're coming from. Now I'll go back to my slides. Here we go. So I'll give it another minute or two. And the link to that survey is in the chat, or there's a QR code on the slides here, which is optional, but it's very, very short.
We should have put a question in the survey asking whether people prefer QR codes or links.
Yeah, maybe.
We'll do that
We'll
for
see.
next time.
We'll do that next time.
Also, bad timing, but apparently there's a Microsoft 365 outage right now.
Oh, that's great.
So we might get people joining late. Because I just got a text from Jessica, my team member, that she can't get on Teams at the moment. So that might be a reason.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
We'll forge ahead, but
I think I may have encountered that to some extent because it took longer than I've ever experienced for Teams to open up. So
okay.
Yeah, I was finding some weird things, I feel like, right before we started.
Yeah, we were in the office experiencing, like, when we were emailing to people, some of our emails were bouncing back, and that was a Microsoft 365 issue. Not on our end, but on the receiver's end. So I guess it's like a big, not just Vermont kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, there was a Verizon outage a few days ago that I heard about that. I was wondering why my phone wasn't working for a while, but 'tis life. So for folks who are here, I think I mentioned earlier, but we have just a quick little survey if you want to partake in that. It's just 3 multiple choice questions. But I can just start giving a brief introduction, and it's okay if people continue to do this. This is being recorded, so we heard that maybe there's some Microsoft issues, so if folks can't join, I can always send the recording to them.
Hey, Allison.
My name, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
We got a chat indicating that question 3 on the survey only has the options of no, and not sure for answers. I don't know if Tessa, I don't know if you have the capability of getting in there and quickly fixing that on the fly, or if we're just going to have to live with that for now.
I don't have access to edit. I'm sorry.
Access. That's okay. Then that one will just be a freebie.
How about if people choose the first no, we'll interpret that as a yes.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so hi everybody. Thanks for joining tonight. My name is Allison Spazek. I work for Lake Champlain Sea Grant. We're also joined tonight, my co-presenter is Shane. So Shane, if you want to give a quick little introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Good evening, everybody. My name is Shane Jakewith. I'm the Watershed Restoration Program Manager for the Nature Conservancy here in Vermont.
Thanks. And we have a few different partners with us tonight, which I'll have them introduce themselves shortly, but we're also joined by Windham Regional Commission, Windham County Conservation, Natural Resources Conservation District, and the Connecticut River Conservancy, as well as, on behalf of the state, the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. So I'll let those folks introduce themselves in a second. If I advance my slides, there we go. So a few housekeeping reminders with Teams in case folks are a little less familiar with the platform. You all were entered into the meeting muted, but you can use the chat. Looks like some people already are. Feel free to put questions, comments, concerns in there throughout the meeting. We're going to do Q&A at the end, and so we'll address them all towards the end of this meeting. You can also, during the Q&A, raise your hand, and that'll indicate to us that you want to come off mute and ask your question. So feel free to do that. But in terms of the agenda for this evening, we'll do a few introductions. Then we're going to hear from the Connecticut River Conservancy, the Windham County Natural Resource Conservation District, and then the Windham Regional Commission, who are all the local partners on this meeting. And then we're going to spend some time talking about the Flood Safety Act, otherwise known as Act 121. And there'll be time for questions at the end. But you can always put them in the chat in the meantime as well. So I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let Tessa, if you want to introduce yourself on behalf of DEC.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Hi, everybody. My name is Tessa Yip. As Allison said, I work for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, specifically on the River Corridor and Floodplain Protection Team, which is part of the overall Rivers program at DEC. Our team is working pretty closely with Allison and Shane on outreach and education around the Flood Safety Act for almost about a year now. So you don't know much about our team. We primarily work with communities to reduce their flood risk as well as protect the natural benefits of our rivers and our floodplains. In my role, I do statewide education and outreach around flood risk and flood resilience and helping people understand, the functions of our rivers and our floodplains. But we also have a team of regional floodplain managers that provide technical assistance to municipalities, mostly zoning administrators or administrative officials for development projects in our floodplains and our river corridors. We have Jessica Barcelow on the call as well. She is the Southern Vermont Regional Floodplain Manager. I don't know if her mic and camera are working right now. I know there's been some Microsoft issues globally, but Jessica, if you can say hi. I'll give you that.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. I can't seem to get my camera to work, but I've got mic, so that's one thing. Yeah, as Tessa said, I'm the regional floodplain manager. I cover Windham, Windsor, and Bennington counties. So I'm here to provide technical assistance at any part of the process, whether that be before an application is submitted, I can answer any questions, look at any informal plans. And obviously after the application is submitted, I'll provide guidance where I can.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. And I can put in a link as well to our regional floodplain manager map in case there's anybody else on this call who doesn't live in Southern Vermont. I'm happy to do that. But yeah, if you have any questions for us, always feel free to contact our team. Otherwise, I will pass it back to Allison.
Thanks. So we're going to hear from a few local organizations to the Southeast and Windham County regions. And then we're going to hear from Shane and myself about the Flood Safety Act. So I'll pass it over to Kathy first to introduce yourself and share a little bit.
Great. Sure. Thanks, Allison. So thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Kathy Erfer. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy and the River Steward in Vermont for Connecticut River Conservancy. As an organization, we do a variety of work in the Connecticut River watershed, including a lot of actual restoration work with landowners on the ground. And so that includes things like dam removals, berm removals, floodplain restoration, increasing the size of culverts, like culvert replacements, and all of that really started after Tropical Storm Irene. And I would say, as an organization, you know, to a certain extent, we kind of feel like we have been in a race against nature to get as many projects done in order to create a like more resilient landscape in the face of climate change. And those projects are wonderful, and we will continue to do that, but we need many more tools in our quiver, mixing metaphors, to really be able to kind of face the future, right? And so in my role as a policy and advocacy professional, CRC was supportive of the passage of the Flood Safety Act. We were involved in it pretty intimately. And I feel like there are a lot of policy measures that we have to take to really be proactive in the face of climate change for a variety of reasons. So, you know, I think for many, many decades, we've kind of lived in this fantasy world that we think we can control rivers, and we have attempted to control rivers. After the floods in 27 and the 30s, we built flood control dams all over the place, and we are at another sort of juncture point in our natural history where we can't really live in the fantasy that that is going to work anymore. I never expected. The Connecticut itself is a very controlled river. There's hydro facilities controlling the flow of the river. And up until last year, I never expected there to be a flooding on the Connecticut, and the floods in the summer. I guess it was the year before last, we had serious flooding in the upper watershed on the Connecticut River. And I think to a certain extent that, you know, reinforced my concern about the urgency of us really needing to take a lot of action to get in front of what's coming and you know, be resilient and adapt, right? So we're supportive of this bill. And you know, I'm very grateful for the effort of Allison and Shane and folks from TNC, the Lake Champlain Sea Grant program, and the Department of Environmental Conservation to be sort of carrying the ball to have these conversations around the state about the Flood Safety Act. We need a lot of education so that people really understand the dynamics of rivers, and need to make way and get out of the way, really move our communities out of the way. And I feel like the Flood Safety Act is really important in kind of moving that conversation forward. So thanks to you guys for that effort. And then I will pass it on to Corey Ross from the Windham Natural Resource Conservation District.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Like Kathy said, I'm Corey Ross. I'm the Executive Director for the Windham County Natural Resources Conservation District. We're based in Brattleboro. We serve all of Windham County. For folks who aren't familiar with us, conservation districts are locally led subdivisions of state government, which basically means we're established in state statute, but that we are run by a group of elected local board members. So folks who actually live in Windham County and are like familiar with the concerns on the ground. We do a wide variety of outreach, education, and technical assistance to land stewards to support conservation and restoration of natural resources. You know, in terms of the work that relates really specifically to flood safety, I just love to highlight that for a minute. We lead an annual process called the Locally Led Conservation Process, where we collect input from the community about what they see as the largest natural resource issues on the ground. We gather key stakeholders, key like policy experts, and review all that data, review planning documents, and then try to make recommendations to the state and to the federal government about basically what the resource concerns are and what we recommend to mitigate those concerns. We can help leverage additional funding, especially from the federal government. And so if the community speaks up and says that flood resiliency is a huge concern, which I think most folks think it is right now, we can help amplify that and make sure that the resources that are needed to combat that are brought to Windham County. And I forgot to check with Allison, but can I share a link to a survey at some point?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll pop that in
Feel
when
free.
I'm done talking. Just if you get a minute, and you want to take a very quick survey, it would really help us to gather more input towards that process. We also do a wide variety of outreach and education. So like this webinar tonight fits in nicely to our goals. Of course, we implement projects much like CRC, berm removals, floodplain restoration, stormwater projects. A really visible one that we love is if you go to Dummerston to the covered bridge there by the longest covered bridge entirely in Vermont, I'm told. There was a big stormwater erosion gully there, and we were able to secure grant funding to retrofit that site to install steps down to the river. They're timber infiltration steps, so they protect water quality, prevent erosion, provide safe access to the river. We can do projects like that. So if you're a land steward and you have a project that you would like to see explored, reach out. We can help develop designs. We can help secure grant funding. We can sort of take the lead on the implementation of restoration projects. We can also do tree plantings. Riparian buffers are, of course, a great way to reduce flood damage and improve habitat quality and all kinds of great things. So we're eager to do those projects, and we're always looking for land stewards that want to participate with us on those. And if we can be of assistance, I'll put my email in the chat as well. And please reach out. We have a number of staff who can come out and do technical assistance visits. Typically, these happen after a flood when folks are like, "Oh my goodness, half my yard's gone," or "I'm worried about my house." And we're not a flood response team, but we can come out and we can help you figure out who can help you, what resources might be available. We can help you write grants. We can step into all those spaces. But it's great when those things happen before the floods, and we can actually help you become more resilient and better equipped when they do hit. I'm happy to pass it off to Margot Gia with the Windham Regional Commission.
Thanks, Corey. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Margot Gia, and I'm the Natural Resources and Regional Planner at Windham Regional Commission. So our regional commission works with 27 towns in southeastern Vermont, but we have equivalent sister organizations. There's 11 regional planning commissions throughout the state that work with towns that are within their region, so that all towns in Vermont have a regional commission that they're associated with. And like our partners, we work on water quality issues and river corridor and emergency planning and flood resiliency issues. We tend, though, instead of working directly with just private landowners, we work mostly with municipalities, and where municipalities and private landowners intersect. So whether it's, often it's around roads and or properties that are next to each other. So, we cover a lot of the same kinds of projects that Kathy and Corey both spoke about, but again, with a municipality focus. But we also tend to work with town select boards or planning commissions, emergency management directors in municipalities, floodplain managers. And we're often working with them on implementing sort of the legislative mandates and acts, such as the Flood Safety Act, when it becomes more detailed and is starting to be rolled out for municipalities. We'll be there to act as a resource and technical assistance for those municipalities to understand the law and help implement, and be that sort of go-between often between the state and the local municipalities. So, if you find that, you're associated with a municipality or you have questions as it might, as this Flood Safety Act continues to be developed and starts to unroll and you have questions, always feel free to reach out to the regional commissions. And again, we work very closely with our partners. So, if a project comes up and it's appropriate, say for the Conservation District or for CRC to work on, we work very closely and make sure that the best fit for whatever types of projects are being worked on can be addressed. So thanks, everyone. And we're really glad that you are here to learn about the Flood Safety Act and in general about why the Flood Safety Act came to be, because as Kathy so well said, that, we are facing sort of new realities as storms get stronger and the rainfall becomes more intense. It is changing the nature of how we have to respond in terms of and working with our natural environment. So I'm going to turn it back to Allison, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Margot. Yeah, I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen, and apologies if for some reason my sound is acting weird. I'm gonna just try to go with it, but somebody will tell me if they really can't hear me, I'm sure. So, yeah, thanks to Margot, Corey, and Kathy. That's some really nice context from your own organizations and from your own perspectives around the Flood Safety Act, and as well as just all of the different issues around water and water resources that we're facing in the southeast part of the state. So this is going to be a fairly quick slideshow. We're going to go over some of the background details and timeline around the Flood Safety Act. This outreach effort is a collaboration between the Nature Conservancy and Lake Champlain Sea Grant, and it's all in support of the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. So this is the initial education and outreach about the Act to provide some of the background that you all need to know to be prepared for subsequent education and outreach, especially once we have more details about how the Act will be implemented. But just to start out with some basic definitions, I took a look at the form. It seems like half of you, or most of you, do know what a river corridor is. Half of you have seen the maps, and another half of you are aware of some of the upcoming changes around the Flood Safety Act. So just so we're all on the same page, the river corridor, what we mean by that is the area on either side of the river that's mapped by DEC, and it's where we expect the river channel to adjust over time. And so many of us are probably familiar with the fact that rivers move and change shape over time in response to changes in the water flow, in sediment loading, caused by human encroachments or other river management practices. And so the river corridor is really, if we keep that space clear, it allows the river to find its slowest and least erosive path down the valley. And so this is an important consideration and relates to the Flood Safety Act, because starting in 2028, any new development in river corridors will require a permit from DEC. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. But continuing in our background information, the Flood Safety Act was passed in 2024 after the historic flooding that our state saw in 2023. And I like to put up this rainfall totals map here from that July 2023 storm, because I think it is really exemplary of the fact that extreme precipitation and the resulting flooding doesn't follow town or county boundaries. And we know that the most successful flood mitigation efforts are often the culmination of many efforts taken beyond town boundaries, so along an entire river system. And so because this act takes a statewide approach to some of our rules and laws around flood regulations, we're also in effect taking a watershed approach, so that all towns upstream and downstream of the same river system have the same protections and will hopefully make us all safer. So the Flood Safety Act aims to mitigate flood risk in multiple ways. First, it establishes state regulation of proposed development in river corridors. That's what we're going to be spending the most of the time tonight talking about. But it's also important to mention that it creates statewide minimum standards for development in National Flood Insurance Program enrolled towns. So we do have our regional floodplain manager on the call, and she is probably more than happy to help you if your town is wondering about what that means for you all. The Act also strengthens dam safety through increased oversight and maintenance requirements, and then also aims to increase floodwater storage in wetlands by establishing a net gain wetland rule. And then we're going to move on to a quick timeline. So really the important thing to know here about the river corridors part of this act is that, like I mentioned, beginning in January of 2028 is when we expect the administration of these new rules to begin. And so we expect that any new development in river corridors will require a permit from DEC starting at that date. And there's a couple of other things that are happening in the meantime, such as education and outreach, identifying infill areas, which Shane will talk a little bit more about too, and then eventually a report to the legislature summarizing public input, and we'll tell you how you can provide public input at the end. So Vermont has a long history of large and destructive floods. I think it's important to mention that this is something that we've been dealing with as far back as 1869. And so for each of these large flood events, the costs of damages have exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's been adjusted for inflation today. So we know that flooding costs us a lot. We also know that it's quite frequent. And so this is a map showing the area of greatest damage from regional floods between 1973 and 2011. And what you'll notice is that almost on a 1 to 2 year basis, somewhere in the state is being affected by flooding. And so even if some of these small storms and damage caused by it don't receive a lot of media attention, it is quite impactful for those towns and budgets and communities and people's lives who live there. And so we know that flooding is the most common and costly recurring hazard in Vermont. It's also been estimated that Vermont's average annual public flood damage costs are around 30 million per year. When we talk about damage caused by flooding, it's important to distinguish between inundation and erosion. So inundation flooding is exemplified by that photo of Montpelier in 2023. And in Vermont, this usually happens when rivers rise above their banks and spill out onto adjacent areas that don't normally have water. And the damage caused by inundation flooding is really damage caused by things getting wet. But on the other hand, we see a lot of damage caused by erosion, which is the collapse or undermining and wearing away of land alongside rivers. And this causes a lot of damage to our roads and our bridges and culverts and any kind of building or structures that might be close to the riverbank. And what we found out from tallying the damage of floods over the years in our state is that over 75% of the monetary flooding damages are actually due to fluvial erosion in our state. So this is an issue that we continue to deal with and is something that the Flood Safety Act is aiming to help address. And now I'm going to pass it over to Shane to give a little bit more river management history. We have Shane.
I know. I was muted. Sorry about that. Thank you, Allison. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Vermont's historic approach to flood hazard mitigation and how that has gone and where that's left us. So we've been, since European settlement, we've really taken what you might call a command and control approach to mitigating erosion hazards. So, going back to that time, we've been straightening rivers to move them out of the way of competing desired land uses, specifically infrastructure development, building, construction, agriculture. So we've been moving rivers out of the way, straightening them in many locations. You can see examples of that on this slide. We have been dredging those rivers to make them deeper, to hold the water in the channel and keep it out of our developments, off of our roads and out of our basements and our houses and commercial buildings. And then we've also been armoring those rivers to keep them where we've put them or prevent them from moving from where they are, so that we can continue or further develop along the banks of those rivers. And unfortunately, what we have learned is that approach just has not been effective, and it's actually led to a significant increase into flood hazards. So I talked about straightening, dredging, and armoring. So I just want to dive into a little bit of detail as to why straightening on this slide, and then we'll talk about dredging, have negative implications with respect to increasing flood hazards. So it all comes down to stream power because, as Allison mentioned, right, so much of the damage we experience is erosion damage. Our roads get washed out, our buildings get undermined, our bridges get failed, right? That's all erosion damage, as Allison mentioned. And erosion is driven by the power of the stream. So stream power is this engineering concept that was developed in the 60s, and it's really just a way to measure the amount of energy that the stream is exerting on the bed and the banks of the river. It's just, measured as energy. You can calculate it in watts if you want to. Pretty straightforward. And straightforward in the sense that stream power really comes down to the slope of the river and the depth of the water in the river, because the slope of the river, the steeper the river is, the more that gravity is working in concert with the flow, creating faster moving water, which is more powerful. The depth of the water is important because the power of the river comes from weight as well as velocity. So water has a unit weight. It's actually 62 pounds per square foot of water. So the deeper the water, the more weight there is exerting pressure on the bank. So let's talk about straightening for a second and slope. So in the upper image, I have a hypothetical straightening project. And so prior to the straightening, the river is meandering. It's long, because it's a meandering path to get from point A to point B. And then if we were to straighten it, as exemplified or hypothetically shown by the blue line, the solid blue line, we would make that channel shorter, right? And so if we look down at the plot, we remember back to grade school mathematics and talking about slope, right? Slope is all about the rise from one elevation to another over the distance of which you achieve that rise. So the longer the river, the flatter it's going to be, as shown by the dashed line, and the shorter the river, the steeper it's going to be, right? All pretty straightforward, but maybe something we don't really think about a lot. So when we straighten rivers, we make them shorter, we make them steeper, and they become more powerful. Okay, so moving on to dredging. What's the issue with dredging? How does dredging influence the stability of rivers and affect erosion hazards? So this is just a hypothetical example of a common scenario, right? So a house gets built in a floodplain and it gets flooded out, and I'm starting at the top panel here, and it gets flooded out a few times, and the homeowner then moving down to the second panel decides that, well, we should dredge the river out so that all that water that's been flooding our house stays in the channel where it should be, right? And so there's a couple issues with that. First is that if you were to go out into that landscape and you were to measure the width of that valley and you were to survey the topography of the land so that you could calculate the amount of area that is available on that floodplain for the water to spread out and slow down, that area is going to be much greater than any than the deepest of river that you could dredge. Okay, so you're never gonna be able to fit all that water into the channel. So that's one thing, but probably more important is that, again, when you create that deeper channel, there's more water that can fill that channel, right? Deeper water in that deeper channel, and now the weight of that newly deeper water goes to work on the bed of the river, and that's moving down to the lower panel in the figure. And the bed of the river and the toes of the banks get eroded away, and the banks fall into the channel, and whatever investments, in this case a house, end up in the channel. So that's the problem with dredging, and that's how dredging has led to more increased hazards. We have deeper channels that are just more powerful. So stepping back a little bit and looking big picture across the state, this image shows what's referred to as a channel evolution model. And similar to the image, it's a figure I showed in the last slide. It starts at the top of the top panel, showing a river that's, again, hypothetically, this is a natural river. You can compare it to the channels below it. It's a small channel. It has a big floodplain. When the flows come up, those flood flows can spread out across that channel. Energy's dissipated, sediment drops out. That floodplain is really a massive pressure relief valve. It's a place where energy is dissipated and pressure is taken off the main channel. So again, in this scenario, the house is built and the second panel down, the homeowners decide instead of dredging the river themselves, they actually berm the channel. Berming a channel has the same impact as dredging it because in effect, you're making it a deeper channel, right? You're building up the banks rather than digging out the bed, but you're making it a deeper channel. So again, you're increasing the depth of water that can occur in that channel. You're increasing the amount of force on that channel, and it erodes downward. And then it erodes outward, moving into stage 3, the third image, the third panel in the figure. And it starts to erode outward, and that's where we fail the infrastructure in the houses. And it keeps going, and eventually it comes back to being a stable channel. But this is a process that takes typically hundreds of years. And you can see how much land mass and infrastructure we lose when you think about this up and down rivers throughout the state. So DEC, going back, starting in about 2004, the Department of Environmental Conservation began doing physical river assessments to understand the condition of our rivers. And what they found after assessing 5,000 miles of river in the field, paying consultants to do this work using a consistent protocol, they have found that 75% of the river miles that they've assessed are in one of these 3 unstable stages, the incision, widening, or stabilizing stage. They are disconnected from their floodplain. They don't have that pressure relief valve anymore, and they are just ripe for massive adjustments when the waters get high. And that is a huge factor in why we see so much flood damage throughout Vermont.
Right. Thanks, Shane. So in Vermont and throughout the United States, we've historically relied on the National Flood Insurance Program to at least help us mitigate and insure us against flood risk. And so communities voluntarily choose to join the NFIP. They have to regulate development in floodplains to a minimum standard set by FEMA. And anyone in the town can purchase flood insurance through the program if your community participates. And so this is just a map showing of how many communities in Vermont currently participate in the program. And you might look at all that green and say, we're doing very, very well. We're doing all we can to help mitigate against flood risk. But there are some drawbacks from relying on this program alone to help us protect our properties and mitigate the risks associated with flooding. So one of those is simply just that Vermont is a rural state. We're also sometimes referred to as a headwater state. And what that means is we have a lot of first and second order streams. Those are the small tributaries up at higher elevation that may look pretty benign for most of the year, just a small trickle. But we also know that those small streams can become quite flashy and also create flood damage during heavy precipitation. And so FEMA generally does not map floodplains for those smaller streams. And so a lot of our river miles in Vermont, we don't have inundation and floodplain data that we can analyze our risk from. Another program is simply that the National Flood Insurance Program wasn't designed to address erosion hazards. And so you can have situations like this house in the photo that is 8 feet above the 100-year flood elevation. And so it's probably not in any kind of FEMA mapped floodplain or hazard area. As you can see, it's not in the 100-year floodplain shown by that yellow area on the map, but it is in the river corridor and it is susceptible to erosion risks. And so that is another reason that we need to consider both erosion and inundation related flood risks. So now I'm passing it back to Shane.
Okay, thanks, Allison. So just going back to the concept of a river corridor, just to do a refresh on that. I feel like we're throwing a lot at everybody, so let's get grounded here for a second in river corridors. So as Allison mentioned earlier, river corridors are mapped by the state of Vermont, and we'll get to that a little bit more, but there are actual maps that you can view. And it sounds like a lot of you are familiar with those. And it's the area we expect the river to move through over time. And really importantly, it is that if we can allow rivers to move back and forth throughout their corridor, they will find a least erosive path over time. Okay, so I think that's probably the most important thing to think about with river corridors. We're actually mitigating flood hazards, not only on the site by not having buildings there, but downstream as well, because we're allowing the river to find its least erosive path. So getting to how river corridors are mapped, it's really pretty simple at its core. You start with a meandering river shown in blue here. You create a meander center line, which is that dashed line, and that meander center line passes through what we refer to as the crossover points. Those are really just the inflection points between one meander bend and another, so that we're kind of we are modeling the overall direction of the river corridor, but not following every little bendway. So we create the meander center line, and then around the meander center line, on either side of that meander center line, we move out 3 times the width of the channel. That's shown by those red arrows. So if the channel is 20 feet, that black line to the north and the black line to the south of the meander center line is going to be 60 feet. Okay, so in total, we have a 120-foot wide belt. Well, 125-foot meander belt. So, and it works out being 6 times the meander belt, right? 3 times the width on one side, 3 times the width on the other side. So a total of 6 channel widths wide. And that really is, in a nutshell, how river corridors are mapped, and it's pretty straightforward. And it's based upon studies that were done in the past, looking at rivers around the world and understanding which of those rivers were more stable, weren't going through that evolution process, had good floodplain connection, and just creating, just recognizing the correlation between the meander belt and the ability to move that those rivers had versus other rivers that had been straightened and otherwise controlled and prevented from moving. So we have both the floodplain, the 100-year floodplain or flood hazard area, the 1% flood hazard area from the National Floodplain Insurance Program, or which is under FEMA. That is shown in the red on this map. And we also have the river corridor shown in yellow. And again, that river corridor is mapped by the State of Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. The point of this slide is just to show that this is, that they work together, they coexist. In some places, the flood hazard area is going to be wider than the river corridor or the erosion hazard area. In other places, the erosion hazard area is going to be wider than the inundation hazard area. And that's simply a reflection of the valley bottom topography and the erodibility of the soils that make up that valley bottom. I think the important takeaway, I'll back up for 1 second. A really important takeaway from this slide is that when we combine both of these hazard maps, we can really provide comprehensive protection and understand comprehensively our vulnerabilities to both inundation and erosion hazards. Thanks, Allison. Okay, so getting into what is referred to as river corridor infill development areas. This is a little bit in the weeds, but it's pretty significant. So we try just to introduce the concept very fundamentally. So in the legislation, there's the call for ANR, or the Department of Environmental Conservation more specifically, to look at all the river corridors, and where those river corridors pass through designated centers. Those are our villages, our downtowns, our growth areas that are densely developed. In this image, this is a hypothetical image. The green polygon is the designated center or a village, or think of it as a downtown area. The legislation mandates that DEC go back and look at those river corridors where they pass through designated centers and identify areas where developing in those designated centers within the river corridor would be least risky, and to identify those areas so that we can continue to develop in those areas, because it's long been recognized that just because a river corridor passes through a downtown or a village, we can't completely prohibit development in those areas, right? We have to respect those areas as designated centers and development areas. So we are trying to, we're trying to do as much as we can to allow continued development in those areas, or the legislature is trying to, try to do as much as they could to allow continued development in those areas. So those areas are referred to infill development areas, and we've done some work starting to try to map them. DEC will take that up throughout the 2-year process that they have until they start implementing this act. This is just a quick note on the jurisdiction of the Flood Safety Act. So, right, our rivers get really big and they start, where they start, they are really small. The Floodplain Safety Act does not have jurisdiction over the smallest of our rivers. And so where do they have jurisdiction? So river corridors are going to be regulated by the state for rivers that are larger, that have a drainage area that's larger than 2 square miles. So this slide is largely just to help to explain that concept of drainage area. So if we're down at the red dot to the right, let's go down to the confluence of those 2 streams that are outlined in green. And as we walk up towards the red dot, the river's getting smaller and smaller. And when we get to the red dot is the amount of land that's contributing water to the stream above us. That's circled in that larger blue polygon. And that has an air surface area, right? We could talk about it in terms of square miles or acres. But in this hypothetical example, let's say it's larger than 2 square miles. So at that point on the stream, you can see there's the green polygon is the river corridor. There's a mapped river corridor at that point. If we keep walking upstream to the next red point, we get to a smaller section of stream. And if we measure the watershed area, we outline that polygon, and that's shown by, again, that blue polygon, but the smaller of the 2. At that point on that river, the amount of land contributing water to every point upstream is exactly 2 square miles. And that's why the river corridor stops there. And upstream of that red point, there's no state jurisdiction to regulate river corridors. Downstream of that area where the river has more than 2 square miles is where the jurisdiction is. Okay, so wrapping up, just some considerations for municipalities. Sounds like some of you are probably aware of this. For those who aren't, if you Google Vermont ANR Atlas or Flood Ready Atlas, you will find maps of river corridors throughout the state. And so you can go there and check out river corridors in your town or whatever your area of interest is. Again, permits for new development in river corridors will be required from DEC as of right now, January 1st, 2028. Thirdly, there is a provision in the act that allows DEC to delegate authority to interested municipalities who might be interested in regulating river corridors themselves. Currently, and for the past, going back to maybe 2014, municipalities, and several have, maybe about 20 or so, have adopted river corridor protections at the town level. And so towns that are interested in continuing to do that can go through a process, and DEC has the authority to delegate authority to the towns to do that. We think most towns feel that it's a real burden and it's complicated. And, we hear that a lot, so they're happier to hear that the state is going to have that responsibility, but the option's there. Details on that will be determined how exactly that'll work as we get into the rulemaking process. Fourth bullet here, municipalities may regulate development along streams with watersheds that are smaller than 2 square miles. So I just walked through the jurisdiction. If a municipality says, we want to regulate river corridors around our smaller streams, they can certainly do that. They can do the smaller streams and the larger streams if they want to do that, if they get authority from DEC. Or they could let DEC handle the larger streams and they could regulate the smaller streams. That's all at this point. Those are both possibilities. And then finally, the Emergency Relief Assistance Fund, otherwise known as ERAF, which is the state fund which contributes state dollars to help municipalities match federal dollars when there are disaster declarations and federal money comes into municipalities. The ERAF fund helps municipalities meet the required match. Currently, if you take actions as a municipality, the amount that the state will give you increases, and adopting river corridors for the last maybe 10 years or so has been one of those hazard mitigation measures that you can take as a municipality to increase the state share delivered to your municipality during times of disaster declarations. Now that this is going to be statewide, that everyone's going to have river corridor protections per 121, it's unclear what will happen with the whole ERAF incentive and the structure of that. So that also is going to be figured out during the rulemaking process before the act is administered. And finally, almost, I think, more information at bit.ly/flood safety act. You can find a bunch of information, presentations similar to this one, recorded, regularly updated information, FAQs, infographics, and other resources. We're trying to put everything we can up there for folks to look on their own time. And finally, one of the things that the legislature was very clear about was that they wanted a 2-year outreach and education program because they felt like this was a big change for Vermonters. And they wanted to see the feedback from those efforts and feedback in general. So if you have questions, comments that you want to put on the record as part of that feedback to the state, you can use the form, the link that we have here, another bit.ly FSA comment link, to submit those comments directly to DEC. And DEC is mandated by Act 121 to assemble all comments, compile all comments, and put those in a report to the legislature. And of course, if you just want to chat or comment or question, Allison and I are happy to talk to folks about this topic. Or we can direct you to the appropriate people that can answer your questions better than we can, if that's the case. And I think that wraps us up.
Mm-hmm. So I can stop sharing, and we're happy to open it up to questions. So if you want to put questions in the chat or raise your hand, that way we can make sure you have the ability to say it out loud if you'd rather do that. Yes, we have that ability.
And Allison, I just want to add, I think there may be a few people who came in a little bit later, maybe not right at the very beginning of any of our presentations. So don't be shy. Like, we understand you can get into a meeting when you can get into it. And if you want us to answer questions from the beginning and think you might have missed something, don't hesitate to ask questions about things you might have missed.
Yeah. So Jessica, you have your hand up. Are you able to unmute and ask your question? It looks like I think you do have that ability. Yes.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say to you guys, I love all the work you're doing, and I wanted to know on the ground level in the communities, what can we do to help? as a community, like I haven't known a lot about it. I've been kind of out of the loop. And I want to know, like, how do you know if there's a hazard or something? Like, how do you know about that? Like, how would you get word about that? And how could you chip in if you wanted to help with something? Or, how would you find out about it? And also, I wanted to also ask you guys, which on a separate thing, in terms of all the disaster stuff that you guys have to work with. Is there any way that have you guys ever asked if you can get the past disasters, like now that certain disasters are covered that weren't covered in history, and you guys have been hit by all of these things that you never got aid for backwards, like, certain things that have happened to the state. And now that you are recognized for those type of disasters, you should be entitled to get those things, and you shouldn't feel uncomfortable asking for it just because the rest of the country may not have caught up with the idea that that happens. That doesn't mean you're not entitled to it. And because you never got the aid and you guys are so overtaxed and all that stuff and all the stuff you're under, it's put you behind everything, and you should be able to get that now retroactively to take you ahead, because you're still in the wreckage. You never got help for those different things. So along the line, checkered, you're still laying in the wreckage, and then the next thing happens, and then that's on you, and then the next thing. I'm just wondering, somebody, I would help you guys in any way that I could, not that you want my help, but I'm just saying, anything that you guys can do, if you have a spokesperson or something, or charity clerk, somebody should go in there to the federal government, or however you guys do it, pick up the bat phone for Donald Trump or whatever, and say that you demand it, because you have every right to get that stuff. Not to mention a protective law for local people and taxes in ski resort areas, which hasn't been done yet. So you guys have basically enslaved yourselves to hold on to your own land, and slavery is illegal. So the president needs to bring in an emergency law to protect you guys from the taxes, number one, so that you don't have to ask every year. And he needs to understand also, in some way, I would help you guys if you needed me to, because I talk a lot, obviously, or you guys could do it from the people that you have that are more graceful. And you tell the president, this is a different place. Somebody needs to come here, get on the ground, boots on the ground, and like literally put in 10 years, because you wouldn't know, and you guys are too young to know that you're living a different life than everybody else. You're 2 generations or so of the ski resort children, and you guys don't know that the rest of the world doesn't live that way, and you deserve more. So you should demand to get the past disasters, because nobody recognized it before. That doesn't mean it didn't exist, and you have every right to get it, and you should get it. I read that the biggest disaster award in the history was Puerto Rico for $13 billion. You guys should demand a disaster relief now and back disasters. And if you ever need a spokesperson, I'm there. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jessica. So I think your first question was, what can we all do? How can we understand flood risks? I would say the first thing is definitely to go to the ANR Atlas or the Flood Ready Atlas. Take a look at what the maps show in terms of river corridors and floodplains and other natural resource overlays. That's a great place to start. Does anybody else, maybe local organizations, have any idea of how folks can get involved in terms of flood recovery or flood relief or doing something?
Allison, I'll just point, and I know you've been involved with this. I know you've been involved with this a little bit. Exactly that, right? The local organization, whether it's Montpelier or Tessa, I believe you're involved with a Waterbury organization, organizing at the local level. I'm sure the RPCs are happy to, the regional commission is really happy to help out or guide that in some way at some level. But those local organizing efforts to largely be able to respond to those disasters and the cleanup in the wake of those disasters is something that's really helpful.
Yeah. And then I think in terms of the disaster declaration, so that is something that you can look up on the FEMA website. So you can search for the state of Vermont, and you can search which years you're looking for. So whether it's 2023 or 2024, because there was actually multiple disasters that were declared in both those years for certain regions. So that is something that you can look up. I don't know if Tessa or Jessica, you have anything to add from
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, I apologize. I just wanted to say I meant the past disasters for the state, like the Hermitage, J Peak, things like that. I didn't mean the last few years. I mean all the way back because you guys never got the help for those things and you're still recovering. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add?
I just wanted to call out that Caroline Paskey also said your local hazard mitigation plan
Right.
is another way to see, what your town, your municipality has addressed about what kind of are the specific hazards for your community and what are ways that they can help to mitigate those risks. Caroline, feel free to turn on your mic if you're able to, or I can do it for you if you'd like to expand on that at all. But yeah, I think watershed orgs for sure are a great way. If there is a local recovery group from past floods, and then even just seeing what is your planning commission or your select board talking about when it comes to flood resilience. And if they're not, you can always bring that to them in like a public comment period in a meeting.
Yeah, thank you for those. Yeah, Margot.
Allison, I just wanted to jump in and just say that, in the next few years, as the Flood Safety Act comes on board and more of the legislation is being talked about in our communities, that it's going to be really important for communities will be having very hard and important conversations about flood resiliency and river corridors and protections, and just being a part of those conversations and expressing support for the protection of river corridors. Often in communities, we hear from people who are against something, but it's really important to have voices that are for something. And so I just encourage you to, especially as things start to roll out in the next couple of years related to this act, but for other water related or any other issues too, it's really important to hear from all sides. And so stay in tune with what your community is talking about.
That's a great point, Margot. Thank you.
Allison, could I add, I'm sure you want to get to
Mhm.
Tabby. Could I just,
Yeah,
one more
sure.
thing? I think it'd be remiss if I didn't mention,
Mhm.
given that Jessica focused on disaster money and declarations and whether or not we have gotten the money in the past, we are experiencing now that it's getting harder to get disaster declaration funding under this administration. And I'm not sure that it's just this administration. I know the FEMA program, the National Floodplain Insurance Program, has struggled financially for quite some time. Tessa and her colleagues know more about this than I do, the current state of that, but it's difficult. So it becomes even more important if the large amounts of federal dollars are not going to be there to help us the way they have in the recent times with flood recovery. It's just that much more important that we're not developing in really vulnerable, hazardous areas so that we have to pick those messes. We have to deal with those damages. So avoidance is really the most effective cost approach strategy there. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you all for all of your answers. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks. And Kathy, do you want to just share the links that you put in the chat too?
Sure. The first is after some of the flooding in the past couple of years, the governor, I guess, set up a portal for being able to volunteer. So that's the first link where you can sign up to kind of help in, somewhat emergency situations or in general. And then the second links I put are just from the perspective of Connecticut River Conservancy. If you want to stay informed about the work that we do and ways to get involved with our work in particular, I added those. Tabby's been very patient, so.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tabby. Let me make sure that you can talk. Yes, you should be able to talk if you would like.
It looks to me like she's still muted, Allison.
Yeah, I think you should have the ability, if you would like, to come off mute, or you can put it in the chat too. If that works. Oh, can you allow? Okay, let me try disabling and then re-enabling.
There you go. Oh.
Let's see.
the sheet, maybe she has it muted on her end because it's a different icon than the others.
Mm-hmm. Tabby, can you try now? That's still not working. Well, if it can't work on your end, you're more than welcome to put your question in the chat or follow up with us separately too afterwards. I think there's anybody else in the meantime? Okay, I'll get to it separately.
Sorry about that, Tabby. Not sure what's going on there.
Anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns? We appreciate you taking the time to listen. It's probably Microsoft. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of Microsoft issues this evening. I was having some before. Well, we don't have to keep anybody any longer. If there aren't any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to any of us after this.
You guys want to leave? You want us to leave you to the professionals? I'll leave you guys to the professionals. Thank you so much for your help. Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, thank
The-
you. And put
Allison,
my email in the chat too.
yeah, and I think the only other thing that maybe we want to say is just be aware that over the next 2 years or year and a half, that there will be more outreach efforts. I think Tessa and her colleagues, as they get into the rulemaking process and the details of all this start to become, more clear, we will be seeing DEC participate in outreach and education to really get into the details and of how this is all going to work. So stay tuned for more. This really was just to get everybody up to speed on where we are at the moment.
Thanks. And it looks like Jessica and Tessa have their emails in the chat as well. So they're going to be really great resources too, if further questions come up. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.